I'd love for you to unfold or unpack even more specifically the Foucault's notions of sexual ethics and specifically identity, even in general. There's so much to be said here, but where does Foucault begin, and how does he develop this throughout his later writings?
Yes. Prepare to forget everything you thought you knew about identity.
Yeah, you are not even
history,
you.
Everything you thought history was is wrong. Everything you thought power was is wrong. And so lo and behold, everything you thought about identity is about to be overturned, according to Foucault. So he starts off with this idea that we have of Victorian sexuality. And if I mention the term Victorian sexuality, most people think, oh, terribly repressive. We don't talk about sex. We pretend it's not there. He calls that the repressive hypothesis. And he says that is 180 degrees wrong. What actually happened, he says, in the Victorian period, is that there was what he calls a discursive explosion. There was a proliferation of language about sex. And he particularly focuses on 4 groups of people about whom language was invented in this period, he says. We've got the hysterical woman, the masturbating child, the perverse adult, and the Malthusian couple. Right. And he says that what happened during this period is that these groups needed regulating in society. And in order to do that, you need a language to speak about them. So languages were developed to talk about these groups in order that they might be regulated in society. He's got this lovely crisp quote from the first volume of his History of Sexuality. He says, "It was time for these figures, scarcely noticed in the past, to step forward and speak, to make the difficult confession of who they were." And this idea of confession, which he gets from Catholic Christianity, is central to Foucault's idea of identity and sexuality. So he says that the Catholic Church predominantly developed this idea of confession that is speaking your deepest desires, taking what is most fundamentally you, if you like, what is really deep down in you, and vocalizing that. And he says that has transformed itself into the paradigm of our society. He says we live in a confessing society. So, back in the day, people used to do it to the priest. He says, well, now we do it to the psychoanalyst. Now we do it on television talk shows. This idea of speaking your identity, of confessing who you are, he says, characterizes our society. And it doesn't simply register something that was there all along, but it actually constructs for Foucault the identity. So you become who you are in talking about it. There's an active role to this confession.
That is very prescient. We see that all the more. I mean, if ever he was right about or putting his finger on something in society, maybe that's it.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly productive as a thought. And how about this? He takes this idea of confessing who you are, and he says that is what is happening in coming out stories, for example, when you're constructing your identity in terms of a particular sexuality. But here's a quotation that I came across years ago that's really, really resonated for me, and I think is incredibly helpful in understanding both Foucault and contemporary society. And I'll just read it out. He says, "We expect our intelligibility, so our understanding of who we are, to come from what for many centuries was thought of as madness." And he's talking about what today we construct as sexuality. He says, our identity comes from what was perceived back in the day as a nameless urge. Hence, he says, the importance we ascribe to it, the reverential fear with which we surround it, the care we take to know it. And this was the key sentence that really leapt off the page and slapped me between the eyes when I first read it. Hence, he says, the fact that over the centuries, it has become more important to us than our soul. So what he's saying is, we used to have this idea of the very deepest me, the inviolable me, is my soul.
Right.
And of course, we as a society don't really believe that anymore. We don't think we have a soul, broadly speaking. No. But that's left a bit of a gap. So what is the deepest me, the inviolable heart of me? And Foucault is arguing here that what stepped into that gap is what today we construct as our sexuality. that is taking the place that the soul used to take in our understanding of identity. And I just think that's incredibly helpful, because it helps to explain, and it helps us to appreciate the huge emotional investment that there is in discourse around sexuality, and the way in which it generates very heated debate very quickly. And I think if we think of sexuality in terms of that is what people understand to be their soul, it becomes easier to see why the debate is so heated around it.